This is No Hate Radio.
I'm no stranger to the rain. Oh, no. I'm no stranger to the rain.
You're listening to No Hate Radio on the Allendale Equity and Justice Channel. As you know, if you've listened to us before, No Hate Radio is broadcast at the intersection of law, social justice, and public policy. There is no issue that is off limits. The only thing that we don't allow is hate. Otherwise, our subjects are open here on No Hate Radio. We have the benefit today in our ongoing discussion of unhoused persons and the social phenomena that has existed in connection with homelessness, and it's, I think, and I'll be educated by our guest today, I think an increasing problem of homelessness as related to the cost of housing, the unavailability of housing, and a lot of other factors that seem to collect together to create the perfect storm, as I would characterize it. And what we have today is a really beneficial opportunity here to hear from Kirsten Anderson. She is an experienced social justice lawyer. I think she is also what you would characterize as a civil rights lawyer, but she's got more background than that. She's worked on senior leadership teams in nonprofit and human rights organizations, directed legal strategy in substantial number of high-profile cases. Her legal advocacy has focused on advancing the rights of people experiencing poverty and homelessness, and hopefully, big hope I think, on dismantling systems of oppression that deprive communities of access to power, resources, and opportunities. She's had a chance to make some law, and those of us that have been in the law, as I have, some of you know that I have for 50 years, getting a chance to make new law is pretty rare. It's pretty rarefied air in today's legal world. And she's had the opportunity to do that, working nationally, receiving multiple awards. She now serves on the American Bar Association Commission on Homelessness and Poverty. Kirsten graduated from the University of Florida's Levin College of Law. I'm going to cut her some slack for that, being somebody from Texas Tech University School of Law. But she graduated with honors. I didn't. So, Kirsten, we consider it such a great privilege to have you here with us today. I know that your work continues on an ongoing basis in doing what you do and what you more or less have always done in your legal career, dating all the way back to about 2005. I don't want to date you too much, but dating back for a long time. So I'd like the No Hate Radio audience to get a chance to get acquainted with Kirsten Anderson. And would you introduce yourself and talk to us a little bit?
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I am really excited to talk about this area of law that I'm really passionate about, which is how we really use the law for social change.
That is like a key point here, because the law has been used for oppression. It has been used, sadly, those of us like you and I who have dedicated our lives to the career in the law, we have to acknowledge, I think, that our profession has been used as an instrument of oppression, as an instrument of hate, an instrument of divisiveness. Some of us took longer than others to realize that. Me being one of the latecomers, I think you must have started your career with an awareness of that because of your resume and because of what I read. Have you always had the feeling that you just expressed, that the law is an instrument for positive social change?
Yes, I went to law school really because I wanted to work on issues of human rights and really just because of injustices that I saw around me and in the world. And I learned really early going to law school. It was really my first day of orientation, and the dean of the law school asked everyone, how many of you came to law school to change the world? And I said, yes, and I put my hand up in the air. And I was in a room of several hundred people, and I looked around, and there were only 4 other hands up in the air. And then the dean said, okay, well, how many of you came to law school because you wanted to make a lot of money? And everyone else's hands went up in the air. And that's when I knew that I had entered into a profession for my own reasons, but that would be really something in which I'd have to fight hard to and really be swimming upstream in a sense, because that's not really why people went to law school. That's not really how you make a living as a lawyer. How you make a living as a lawyer generally is wealthy people pay you money to protect their money and their property interests. And to do something different, to not charge your clients money for your legal services, and instead work for a nonprofit organization that provides legal services to people who could not afford to pay. That in and of itself is a pretty radical departure from the usual way in which the profession operates.
I think that was a diplomatic way to put it, Kirsten, because when I went to Texas Tech Law School, a similar thing occurred. And the idea was the motivations were not maybe as clear-cut as what your description was, but nonetheless, I'm always, if you know me very well, you know I love to quote song lines, and one of my favorite singer-songwriters is Chris Christopherson, who did a kind of a parody, kind of a song based on sarcasm more than anything else, called "The Law is for the Protection of the People." And the question is, what people? And so now we find ourselves in a social system in America where we have created in 1776 and 1789 and through a exodus from the United Kingdom, the Great Britain, a notion of equality and justice and the rule of law and not of man. We created this image. We created this goal, this ideal. And it's clear to me, and it's, I guess, transparent to the casual observer, we've never achieved it. Never. There have been times I think we've been closer to it. But right now, in today's, I think, rather acidic times, tough times, hard times, in a lot of ways, we seem to be farther from it than we were 50 years ago. I am caused to remember Dr. Martin Luther King's speech about "I Have a Dream," and that was in, I think, 1963, but I'm going to be pretty close when I say that. And I think back on that, and I think Dr. King would be disappointed in our current circumstances. So what you work at the intersection of truth to power, I'm going to call it, when you represent people who don't have a voice. Can you tell us about some of your cases that surround trying to gain a voice for people who otherwise don't have any?
Yeah, I think that if I had to characterize one theme of my legal career, it would be that I specialize in suing the government. And the purpose of that is to hold government accountable to the people it's supposed to serve. You said, who are the people? And a lot of times the people who are listened to are people who have money and influence and lobbyists and, donate to people's campaigns, those kinds of things. And so the people I represent, typically they have voices. They just are not listened to or invited into these tables of power where people are discussing, policies that are going to directly impact them. And so in one sense, I think the courts can be a great level playing field, because having a license to practice law is quite a powerful thing. And to be able to wield that on behalf of people who do not have privilege or power, people are forced to listen when you file a lawsuit. You're required to answer. You're required to come into court and explain, when you're a government official, why you took a particular action, and you are presenting it to a neutral judge who's going to make a decision. And so, from that perspective, I think it's a really powerful way to, just by having a lawyer, changes your outcome in court, but to have a lawyer to do what I do, which is affirmative litigation, which means that you actually sue people and bring people into court rather than defensive. Like, a lot of people end up in court because they're being prosecuted for a crime or they're getting evicted. And so they're the ones defending against an action that's being taken against them. Whereas what I have done is gone into court and sued for violations of constitutional rights, for example. And the areas of law that I've most regularly practiced in have been in the area of the constitutional rights of people experiencing homelessness. Because what happens oftentimes, talk about a really politically unpopular group, they have no place to stay, no permanent housing. And instead of offering housing and services, what our government often does is criminalizes homelessness. And so they do that by making it a crime to do anything that's essential to survival. We all need to sleep every single night. All human beings need to sleep. I slept last night. Did you?
Although during law school, we had less of it than we do now, but I agree with your proposition.
That's true, right? And at some point, if you don't sleep, you don't think well, it can impact your health, and it can even result in death. That's why they use sleep deprivation as torture, which is prohibited by the Geneva Conventions. But in a lot of cities in America, it's a crime to sleep outside. And they do that not because they're concerned about casual nappers in the park or people who just happen to fall asleep on a park bench while they're reading the newspaper. It's because we don't want to see homelessness and poverty in our communities. And so instead of housing, oftentimes all we offer are handcuffs.
So don't you, as I listened to you, I thought the ultimate analysis here, and you said it at the end, we don't want to see homelessness. But the question is, do we want to do anything about it? Because one of the things I think I've told you before we went on air that this podcast is about every time, and if I don't do it, I'm going to have my producer jump on me about it. I want to, in every time we go on air, I want to ask two questions. Why? And what are we going to do about it? And I think we've already addressed some of what you're doing about it, but it seems to me that what government, at least my perception, and please, you're in it, you're out there every day, please correct me if I'm wrong. What government spends a lot of time doing is trying to hide it or keep it from being visible to the ones who, I guess to put it crudely, pay the bills, make the campaign donations, own the properties, so forth. They don't want those people, they meaning most government bodies, elected officials, they don't want those people to have to see homelessness. But my question for you, Kirsten, in your career, are governments really trying to do anything about it?
Well, I think maybe even the better question is, are we, the people, trying to do anything about it? Because our government is representing us. And what I've seen over and over again is that people, everyday people, come into city commission chambers, to county commissions, and they say, we have too many people sleeping on the streets. There's too many tents that are up. I'm afraid to go outside. I'm afraid to go downtown. You have to do something about this. And the demand for that immediate reaction is oftentimes what ends up with cities and counties saying, okay, well, let's pass an ordinance. We'll pass an ordinance to make it a crime to sleep outside. We'll pass one to make it a crime to have too many belongings. We'll pass an ordinance so that we're going to ban group feedings so that we don't see too many people accumulated getting food. And you hear all kinds of stereotypes about that, people who are giving out charity, they're enabling people to be homeless and poor. And if we didn't have so many people doing good, then we wouldn't have homeless people. A lot of stereotypes, a lot of misconceptions about the root causes of why people are sleeping on our streets. And so rather than having a really productive public policy debate about what can actually be done, a lot of times we kind of take the easy way out, which is, okay, well, we'll just give the police more tools and so that they can put people in jail. And but that consumes a tremendous amount of public resources that we are not transparent about. It costs way more money to have people sleeping on the streets, just in terms of hospital stays and time in jail, than it does to actually provide housing. And so if we actually did even a fiscal analysis of this type of response to homelessness, it wouldn't make any sense. But we don't say that when people are confronting our politicians. And I think we're all responsible, because I think when people go down to a nice downtown and don't see anyone experiencing homelessness, nobody really wonders why that is. Or because if you think that you're living in a community in this country where there aren't people struggling to put a roof over their head, you're mistaken. So where are they? Are they sleeping in their cars? Are multiple families doubled up for the night? Are they in motels like in Orlando? There's a strip along Highway 192 that used to be tourist motels, and now it's just full of families with children who can't afford other than to stay at these extended stay motels. So that is the situation that we're in, and it's really simple. Housing ends homelessness, period. And that's it. There might be all kinds of things that contribute to why people lost housing, to why people are having trouble maintaining housing. It could be income, domestic violence, all kinds of issues that are intersecting. But at the core, the one thing that kind of unifies everybody experiencing homelessness is that they don't have housing. And so a lot of times right now we're saying, actually what people need is mental health treatment, or they need substance abuse treatment. Basically everything is needed except for housing, and housing is really what people need. There's plenty of people with mental illnesses who have houses. There's plenty of people with substance abuse disorders who have houses. But, at the core, it is housing, and it is the way in which we have made housing a commodity instead of a basic human need and a basic human right.
And that's an interesting point, too, because as I listened to your thought process, which is pretty analytical and it was pretty heavy duty, I did come up with a couple of things. It had an echo of Jim Crow 2.0. The way we try to address issues in this country is we pass laws against the conduct, but we don't tell those people who are, quote, violating those laws how they can keep from it. In other words, it's like putting someone in a position through a whole series, as you pointed out, an intersection of causes, the why question as it was, and that person winds up in that position. And I'm going to just use a specific example, Pinellas County, Florida, St. Petersburg. There are many, many actual true stories of year-to-year rent increases doubling. In other words, rent last year was $750 for a one-bedroom unit of some kind. This year it's $1,500. If you're the person who lives in the $750 unit, you've been housed. You've had a home. You've had someplace. Probably you were working at a job that helped you pay the bill for that. We have what we call sudden homelessness, as opposed to long-term homelessness that may be attributable to a substance abuse problem, an alcoholism problem, as you said, domestic violence may have driven someone from a home. But there's this sudden homelessness problem that is presenting itself, I think, in a lot of communities like St. Petersburg. So you have people get into a situation like this, which is brand new to them. They've not ever experienced such a thing as homelessness, as being out on the street, loading up in their cars. Probably, to some extent, were not even aware that there was a law against sleeping in a public park or doing, on a park bench or something. And they wind up in violation of the law with no way out of that hole. The great humorist Will Rogers said, when you find yourself in a hole, first thing you do is stop digging. Well, the trouble is, it seems to me, and I'm interested in your wisdom on this, it seems to me that what we've done in the process of passing laws to keep people from seeing homelessness is we've caused people to be forced into a situation where they are, in fact, violating the law, don't know how not to violate the law because there's no solution. So is the law for the protection of the people, Kirsten?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think that what we're really seeing is in my view, a misuse, an abuse of police power. And what we are seeing is a situation where I always tell people that if someone doesn't have a criminal history when they become homeless, and plenty of people don't, that it's a miracle if you can get out of homelessness without having a criminal history, because everything that you have to do to survive is a crime. And even the use of laws like trespass, which seem pretty neutral on their face, but trespass is a crime of physical presence. There's only two types of property. There's public property and private property. And if you don't own property, you don't have any place where you're really allowed to lawfully be. And so that becomes a challenge. And I think, especially as a lawyer who works in the South, there is very clearly a direct line from vagrancy laws, which really go all the way back to England and the poor laws in the 1300s, and were really about punishing people for being poor and being idle and not having land or a job, and not about punishing conduct, criminal conduct. And kind of the premise behind all criminal conduct, as you reference, is that I know what the law is and I can avoid doing it. There's kind of two problems when you criminalize homelessness, which is that we end up with these very vague laws where it's very hard to know what to do and not to do to avoid breaking the law. And also, you cannot deter somebody through the use of the criminal justice system from doing something that they have to do to survive. You can't. Every human being needs to sleep, to eat, to sit, to have belongings. You might need to ask somebody for help when you need money or food or a job. All of those things are criminalized in many of our cities, in this city, in St. Petersburg, and all of those things are necessary for survival. And what is really striking to me is that just like the Jim Crow South, when we had black codes and vagrancy laws, and you saw those all get struck down as unconstitutional by the U.S. Supreme Court in the 70s, really starting in the 60s, but it went up to the Supreme Court in the 70s. And then after that, we have what a lot of scholars have started to call like the new vagrancy laws. And I'm part of, this kind of generation of lawyers that have been challenging these laws. And what really strikes me is that they are so blatantly unconstitutional. There's really no excuse for city after city to continue to pass these laws. And I think there is really a simple explanation for why you would do that. And that is that you are just making a bet that no one is going to have the capacity to go into court and sue you because your laws target people who are the poorest and most vulnerable in our society.
I had a law professor one time who I have always admired. He said, everything's constitutional until somebody says it isn't. Everything. So you think about some of the ordinances, city ordinances are flagrant violations many times of fundamental constitutional rights. I was once in my legal career before going on the judicial bench, I was city attorney in 4 or 5 what's called general law municipalities in Texas. And I spent most of my time as city attorney in city council meetings or in sessions explaining to elected city council members why they couldn't codify, they couldn't criminalize, they couldn't pass a law that would essentially be what I used to refer to as a status offense. You can't be a vagrant. You can't be gay. You can't be. It started with be instead of do. And it's amazing to me how many people, elected officials, have the motivation to I want to introduce this, it's going to fix the problem because we're going to tell people they can't be on public property. And as you pointed out, real estate has two characteristics. It's either owned by somebody or it's owned by everybody. And that's owned by everybody is controlled and regulated and managed by whoever we elect to do these things. And it occurs to me as I listened to your analysis that there is just almost a flood of this low-level legislative enactment. When I say low-level, I mean city or counties, And now I see it again. You're in it every day in the trenches. I'm not, but what I see, my view from 5,000 feet, is that now same thing's happening at state levels. You have state legislators who seem to have the mindset that if they can pass a law, let's say against homelessness or against vagrancy or against some, I'm going to call it B offense, if they can do that, they'll be a hero with whoever is their campaign donor, their base, they call it. And second, they delude themselves into thinking now they've solved the problem. And isn't it self-deluding, in other words, to think that you've solved a problem by creating a law that says you can't be this, you can't do this, and then not put a system in place that will allow people a path to solve it. I'll just throw in, I know the subject can get too wide, but it can not only be racial, it can be socioeconomic, it can have to do with your gender expression, it can have to do with immigration, it can have to do with your status. You can't be a Guatemalan without papers. So you, as a human being, are an illegal. It's a B offense. So can you kind of elaborate on some of that?
A good example of this is a case that I did with some other amazing civil rights lawyers in Ocala, Florida, which Ocala, excuse me, a lot of people know Ocala as like the horse racing capital of the world, a lot of wealth, a lot of horse farms, and they were really working on revitalizing their downtown. And so they passed an ordinance that made it a crime to lodge in the open. That was the name of the open lodging. And they define lodging as sleeping if you were also homeless. It was written into the law. And
repeat that. It's against the law to sleep if you're homeless?
Only if you're homeless. They wanted to be very clear that they were not targeting, people who were in the park watching a movie, an elderly person who was just sitting on a park bench reading a newspaper. They did not want casual nappers, only people who were intending to make outside their home, basically. And in the city of Ocala, like so many cities in our country, there was not only not housing available for people, but there was also not sufficient shelter space. And a lot of the shelters also were just inaccessible to people because of they weren't appropriate to people's needs who had disabilities. They had limits on stay. All kinds of barriers to actually accessing the shelter. So there was no question that on any given night in the city of Ocala, there were people who had no choice but to sleep outside. And over a 4-year period, hundreds of people had been arrested and jailed and sentenced to long sentences. The max was 60 days that you could get sentenced to. That owed thousands of dollars in court costs and fines. And so we came into the community. Some concerned folks had called us. And I remember I had shown up to, it was actually a meal at a Methodist church that they were offering to people experiencing homelessness in the community. And like 200 people were there eating. And someone at the church had introduced me as a lawyer who was there to talk to people about their experiences being arrested under this law. And I got a standing ovation just for showing up, just for being there. I hadn't done anything. And I went back to my office and I said, we're doing something, because a line of 20 people stood up to talk to me. And we started investigating. And we ended up filing a lawsuit, and the primary claim that we ultimately succeeded on was an Eighth Amendment claim. So
an Eighth Amendment
Eighth
claim?
Amendment. So the Eighth Amendment protects us from cruel or unusual punishment. And the Supreme Court has said that it is cruel or unusual to punish someone for a status crime. And so the examples from the Supreme Court have been making it a crime to be an alcoholic or making it a crime to be a drug addict, which is like the terms that were in some of these old laws. And so in this case, making it a crime to be homeless, we said was an unlawful status offense. And the court agreed with us, a federal district court judge, and ended up striking down the law as unconstitutional. So, it is absolutely a status crime. It is for who you are. It is for the status of being a human being who needs sleep and has no place to do so but outside.
I think it's just powerful what you're talking about in terms of the litigation. When you couch it in terms of the Constitution, like you did, the Eighth Amendment, and I've been a lawyer 50 years, and it took me aback. I thought, wait a minute, the Eighth Amendment's cruel and unusual punishment, and yet you're absolutely correct. If you create a status offense, it seems to me, that makes it a crime to just be something, it harkens back in my thinking back to England, where it was a felony, I think, or an offense of felony grade to be a homosexual, just to be that. You didn't have to do anything. You just had to be that. I guess we've carried this into our country. I won't say who said this, but a beacon of great light to get a chance to live in Florida or whatever it is that's being said. Again, I want to go back to an early part of our discussion today. We've never achieved what we say we are, never. And these laws that you're talking about are not only discriminatory in nature, it seems that they would permanently create a very clearly defined class system or caste system, which we say we do not have in America. We say that is not true. As being a person a great deal older than you, but who was involved in watching the civil rights movement of the '60s develop, you had the civil rights movement, the initial civil rights movement. You had the passage of the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act. You had the women's movement. You also had the Vietnam War, and you had exposure of government fraud, essentially, by the Great Washington Post 1968 article. You had the impeachment of a president, or the resignation of a president. All that happened from 1962 to 1972. And it seems to me we don't learn from those history, that the old adage that those of us who don't read history are sentenced or whatever it is to repeat it. We seem to be doing that. Do you have some ideas on that, Kirsten?
I think what I will just say, I don't know that I have any great wisdom about all of this, but I think one thing that when we think about the advancement of rights, I think that is something that a lot of people nowadays are kind of shocked by, what is kind of a reversal of rights that we thought we had won was done over. Roe v. Wade, is one example. And
very familiar with that one. It was out of Dallas County, Texas.
Right. So in reproductive rights, women's rights, and, very, very important. And then, to see that get rolled back in the Dobbs decision was really shocking. And I think people, there's a lot of fear around some of the other gains that we've had in terms of like non-discrimination on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation, for example. And as somebody who has worked at the intersection of really poverty law and social justice, civil rights, from my vantage point, what I have seen is a Supreme Court that has progressively made us less equal, particularly as it relates to economic status. In fact, when you look at equal protection, which is a 14th Amendment concept that, we all have equal rights under the law, there is no special protection on the basis of economic status or poverty. It's not recognized. You can look and see examples across all different levels of our systems and government. And so, we really do have a system where our system of laws and our lawyers are really upholding interests of people who have property and wealth, which is really kind of as it always has been. And so, what to do about it, I think that we have to continue, because at some point, I think you see this in democracies across the world, you get to a point where you have too much economic inequality that democracy itself becomes unsustainable as a system of governance, because the basic kind of core social contract of a democracy is that you take care of all of your people. And if your government fails to do that, then people lose faith in the government, in governance itself, in democratic governance itself. And in some ways, that is part of what we're experiencing and seeing in this country. And so, from my vantage point as a lawyer who represents people experiencing poverty and homelessness, working on issues of racial justice and the ways in which, we are depriving people of access to choices, resources, and opportunities on the basis of race and economic status, I really still believe in the rule of law and upholding the rule of law, which is why I think kind of case after case of saying, no, the Constitution actually does protect us all, and continue to push back. And the other thing I think that's really important in terms of why I do what I do is that the reason there aren't as many cases adjudicating the rights of people experiencing poverty is that there aren't as many lawyers who are bringing the cases. And judges can only judge cases that are in front of them. And so this work really requires people who are willing to bring cases, and also really brave people who are willing to be plaintiffs in civil rights lawsuits. My clients who I represented in the Ocala case, were just so extraordinary, and they were experts in homelessness, and they are the last people who we generally consult about solutions for homelessness. A lot of times when we talk about homeless solutions, it's a bunch of people sitting around a table who have never actually experienced homelessness. And then, we come up with like systems and shelters, and then wonder why nobody wants to come to them because, they're terribly designed. And I remember we were taking depositions in the case, and the city attorney had asked each of our clients, oh, well, what do you think we should do about homelessness if you don't want us to be doing this? And they all had really thoughtful,
Good ideas.
And I'm pretty sure nobody ever asked them before. And so I think, for someone to be sleeping on the street at night and then to stand in there and sit through a deposition and, go to court, it was just really this incredible honor to represent the clients that I had in that case, Courtney, Anthony, and Pat. And, I think that it really is also the responsibility of kind of all of us, because I think too often in this society, we are individually focused instead of thinking about the collective good. And it really is not good for any of us if so many people are allowed to fall through, this frayed social safety net that really doesn't exist anymore.
It's really gone.
It really is gone. And, I think one really good example of that is there's always more people sleeping on the streets, experiencing homelessness at the end of the month than at the beginning of the month. And the reason for that is that people get their checks from the government on the first of the month. So people who got disability, for example, which the government's decided, okay, you have a disability, you cannot work, here's your government check. That is not enough to purchase housing on the private market. And so people will use that money to purchase motel rooms, but that's more expensive. And so when the money runs out, then they end up being on the street. So I've met so many people in this city, in St. Petersburg, who will be inside for 3 weeks of the month, and then they will sleep on the street in the last week of the month. People in wheelchairs, and so, as a lawyer representing clients experiencing homelessness, I know like at the beginning of the month, I'm not going to be able to find anyone because everyone's going to go inside. But I think that's a good example of showing that when people can afford to go inside, they want to. Everyone wants the stability of a home.
Sure.
And so it's, this notion that people are outside because they choose to be is just false.
In the category then of what are we going to do about it. If one is legally trained, if one is a lawyer, most state bars, I know I'm a member of 3, and they have a pro bono program. You're right about judges, by the way. I was sitting on a bench for 28 years. Judges can't just go out and get a case. They just can't. They can't do that. So if I'm a judge, I'm dependent on lawyers who care. And so one of my takeaways from our session today on what are we going to do about it is that, unfortunately, our elected officials are unlikely to do anything about it because of the structure of the electorate, because of Citizens United, because, I could go on for 30 more minutes about that. But the takeaway is, if lawyers would truly follow their calling, act as officers of the court, reach out on a pro bono basis, step outside the economic framework of practicing law, much like those who work the Innocence Project, much like those who work immigration cases for nothing. There's some of that going on in the bar, for sure, and you're a perfect example of it. One of the what are we going to do about it category might be to get more people, more lawyers, stepping outside the economic framework and doing more, taking on that real client, that one you identified your Ocala clients by first name. That's pretty important, Kirsten, because you know them as people. It's pretty easy to dismiss the vague them. Not so easy to dismiss Anthony and Pat and Courtney. Not so easy, is it, to do that? Lawyers like you, and I know this sounds very naive for a 50-year lawyer and a 28-year judge, but I used to say to lawyers when I would swear in new lawyers, past the bar and done their thing, and they've got their paperwork there, and they're going to be sworn in as members of the bar. And I used to say, you only have 2 choices, lawyer. You can either be part of the solution or you can be part of the problem. You can't be both. You can't be neither. You got to be one or the other. So, in the category of what are we going to do about it, we're going to get more lawyers to care and be part of the solution instead of part of the problem.
I think that's great. Especially there was just a study that came out from the American Bar Association, I believe is who puts this out, that there are less than 2 lawyers for every 10,000 people experiencing poverty in the state of Florida. That's just a idea of the scope of the problem.
That's an overwhelming number.
That's an overwhelming number. And that just shows you how many unmet legal needs there are out there. But I will also say, similarly, I think all of us have a responsibility as well, because a lot of times, and I cannot emphasize this enough, when cities and counties pass these laws, they are doing it in response to complaints from what they perceive as their constituents. And I'll give you a really good example of how a community can demand other solutions, which is in Gainesville, Florida, where the University of Florida is, where I lived for many years. There, the city, a number of years ago, was going to pass a sleeping ordinance. And everyone universally kind of came out against it when it was publicized. The public defender, local lawyers, local activists, and the public backlash was swift. And that hearing room was packed with angry people who said, this is not who we are. We are not criminalizing homelessness in this community. And the city council said, okay, we hear you. Let's hear from you about other solutions. And Gainesville's not perfect, and they don't always get it right. And, they have a complicated history as well with issues of homelessness. But that experience really was a testament to me of how important community activism is as it relates to really demanding something better from our cities and counties that are really directly responsive to what, ordinary people want to say. Ultimately, the power in our system is in the people. And so what I do as a lawyer is simply use the tools of power to make sure that people have access to judges and courts and the protection of the rule of law. And just like that, I think protests absolutely are important, and so is the political action that flows from them. We've seen a lot of victories on the issue of abortion rights in states like Ohio and other states where it's directly been on the ballot. And so I think that if people won't listen, we need to make them listen in courts, at the ballot box, citizen initiatives, and referendums, and voting people in and out. But it really has to be collective action and community engagement that ultimately will prevail at the end of the day.
Thank you so much for that insightful and deep analysis. And I truly want to thank you. And I'd ask you to come back and talk to us again on more issues, because, as I said on No Hate Radio, no boundaries. We're going to talk about them all. We're going to talk about every issue. We're not going to shy away from any of them. And that goes from abortion rights to gun control to immigration to all of them. All of them. It's all in the basket. It's all open for discussion. And you're very helpful and very insightful. And we would really appreciate you coming back and talking to us some more, Kirsten.
Thank you. I'd love to. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to our broadcast today. We appreciate your interest and invite your input either by calling our message line at 442-4-NO-HATE and leave us your thoughts, comments, ideas, or suggestions, or send us an email by using the email link on our website, or directly email us at nohateradio@allendaleequityjustice.com.